Several weeks ago, I don't know if you know this about me, I really love playing Ultimate Frisbee. It's not the only sport that I'm actually decent at. The rest of them is kind of just hit or miss. I have good games, and then I have about 100 bad ones. And so Ultimate Frisbee is about a 50-50 chance that I'll be decent in the game. And so I like playing Ultimate Frisbee. And anyway, me and a bunch of friends, we were playing Ultimate Frisbee. And I was a team captain, and I was talking to the other team captain after my team had won the game. And we were talking, and we were cracking jokes, and of course I was making fun of him, and he was saying I cheated, as you know people do, joking. And he made this joke, but there was a sense of sincereness and reality behind it. He's very athletic dude, very good at every sport. He's one of those people that God just blessed at being good. If it's athletic, then he's gonna be good at it, and he doesn't have to practice. Practice makes him better, but he's already just kind of good at it for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And so we and him were joking, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I got to pick first. My drafting was a lot better than his was, so my team was faster, more athletic, and we were a little bit better at predicting where the Frisbee was going to go. And so my team genuinely was better. When you look at maybe statistic-wise, I had a better team than he did. And he cracked this joke. He said, if there was more than one of me, we would have whooped you. And I said, that is absolutely true. I don't doubt that if there was more than one of him, we would have had no chance because he's just really good. But, it's that thought process that gets you thinking, if everyone was like you, what would something look like for him? If everyone on his team was as athletic as he was, we probably wouldn't have got a point. When you think about your work life, you think about certain coworkers being more active than others. There are some that are more willing to do stuff. They see something needs to be done and they're willing to do it. And you think, man, I wish everyone at the job was more like that person. And then you see the people that don't do that and you think, I am really glad there's only one of you. And it's not something that you do because you're trying to be mean and you're trying to stereotype people, but there's a reality. And when you see people, one does wonder, what if everyone in that certain situation was one specific person? What would that look like? I would think about, I did whenever he said that about what my team would look like if everyone was exactly like me. And I'm afraid to find out what that would have went like if everyone was like me. We're not going to go through that. But you do. I don't know if you've ever done that. If you've ever thought about what if everyone in a certain situation was like me, not in a judging, like making yourself better than others, but in a looking in yourself to see what if everyone was like me in that situation, not by like looks and stuff like that, but the way that they reacted and responded to a situation. What if everyone reacted and responded in the same way? What kind of mess would be made? I do that. I wonder, like, what in this situation, what would have happened if everyone had responded like I did? I don't know if you've ever done that. I think it's something you should do. It's a good reflective thing to think on and seeing. Because sometimes there's problems that get created and we fuss about it when in reality we were the problem. And that's something that's hard to pick out. That's something that's hard to accept. But it's something that you realize a lot more when you think about what if everyone had responded to the situation like I did? Would the same thing have happened? Would something better have happened? Or would something worse have happened? And so that's something that you just kind of think about and you walk through. And that's what we're going to do this morning, but something very specific. And I have a confession. I have two confessions, I guess. First off, this isn't going to be a very long lesson. It's just not. And I'm sure you're probably kind of happy with that. But, it's not going to be very long. But second, when we do this, I did not create this with the intention to target anyone. I did not create this with the intention to step on anyone's toes. If that happens, I did not intend for it to. And so that's the other confession. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump in. I want you to take your Bibles, and then we're going to go to Acts chapter 26 to kind of kick this thing off. Acts chapter 26. We think about what if everyone responded in the same way that I did to a certain situation. It's with this in mind we go to Acts, and this is going to be our launching text for this morning. Acts chapter 26. If you remember or you know anything about the progression through Acts, you know that this is when Paul is in prison. He's not yet in Rome, but he is in custody. And you have him, and in 26, he's giving his defense to Agrippa. And we're going to read verses 28, but 28 and 29, before we do that, what had happened is you have Paul in prison, and he's given his defense to Felix, and Felix did nothing about it. Felix was about to lose his spot, and he wanted to make sure the Jews were still happy with him when he left, and so he kept Paul in prison, or Festus rather. And then you have Felix come in, and Felix has a problem. Felix is trying to figure out, what in the world am I supposed to do with this guy? Because this is an interesting situation to be put in. And so you have Felix had done what he had left Paul in prison. Festus comes in. Festus hears about what Paul had caused trouble with the Jews. The Jews tells him all of these things, and Festus is like, okay, now what do I do with him? Because, they want him dead, but you can't. Romans, it wasn't their custom to just have someone killed before they give a defense. And so Festus wanted to hear that. Well, Agrippa is in town, and Agrippa wants to hear this, but Festus wants help with this. He needs another guy with a political mind to help him walk through what he should do. And he says, Agrippa, I want you to come hear this. And Agrippa's like, sure. Because Agrippa has probably heard about Paul. And so you have these two men that are wanting to hear this defense that Paul is going to give. And so here's Paul again, defending his right to exist, defending his faith in God. And so he walks through his early life, and then he walks through his conversion on the road to Damascus, and then he walks through his post-conversion life. And he's walking through all of this, proving that all of these things that the Jews are saying is not true. Okay, there's no merit to what is being said. All of these things that have happened, they weren't done in a quarter. And I know you know that, Agrippa. And he's walking through all the things. I've done nothing wrong to anyone. I've not broken any laws. I've not done any of these things. And the Jews are just making all this stuff up. And you have Agrippa and you have Festus, and they're sitting there listening to this. And then when we get to verse 24, I want us to jump back there. And this is where we're going to read. Paul's giving this defense, a great defense. And this is where we get 24. Now, as he had thus made his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are beside yourself. Much learning is driving you mad. And Festus is kind of sitting here, Paul talking about a voice talking to him through a light on the road to Damascus, and him being blinded, and Ananias, and it falls off, and walking through all this, and Festus is like, you're nuts. Like, what is this? And Festus can't grasp this. And then Paul responds with, I'm not mad, most noble Festus, but speak the words of truth and reason. For the king, before whom I also speak freely, knows these things. For I am convinced that none of these things escapes his attention, since these things were not done in a corner. And he says, Festus, look, I'm not crazy. And the king knows it. The guy that you want with you consulting about this, he knows about these things, because I'm convinced that none of this stuff happened in a corner. None of this stuff was just like private, and we as Christians keep all of this confined and cultish. This was not done in a corner, and he knows about it. And he says, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? Doesn't even give him time to respond. I know you believe. And then here you have Agrippa say, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. So here you have King Agrippa, who is around the Jews a lot. And he hears this defense, and he's already kind of sitting there thinking, But then Paul goes a step further, and he says, Festus, I'm not crazy, and the king knows it. None of this stuff was done in a corner. The king knows all of this stuff happened. He's not saying anything, but he knows. He says, Agrippa, he addresses him directly, do you believe the prophets? All of this stuff that happened before was prophesied, and Agrippa knew that. And he said, I know you believe. In other words, he had said all this stuff that had happened, Jesus doing the things that he did and dying and coming back from the dead, all of this stuff had been prophesied. And Agrippa, though not a full Jew, was immersed in Jewish culture, and he knew about the prophecies. And all of this stuff was not done in a corner. Therefore, he saw the prophecies be fulfilled, or at least heard about them being fulfilled. And so Paul says, do you believe the prophets? I already know you believe. You don't even need to answer the question. And so here sits Agrippa, knowing the prophecies about Jesus and what he would do, knowing that they were fulfilled, and then hearing a man who was willing to give his life in defense of that, no matter, and he was standing before all these big guys but he's given his defense to Felix, he's given his defense to Festus, and he's given it to Agrippa, these powerful men, and he's not afraid, he's not changing the story. And so here you have Agrippa sitting there like, oh, Paul, you almost persuaded me to be a Christian. You chill out. Like, I just wanted to hear what you had to say, and you're trying to convert me. And then Paul says, in verse 29, then Paul said, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me today might become both almost and altogether such as I am, except for these chains. And so here's Paul giving his defense. And Agrippa said, Paul, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. And Paul says, I not only would persuade you, I don't only want you to be a Christian, I want everybody in this room, because there's a whole lot of people other than just Festus and Agrippa watching this. He said, everyone in this room to become almost and altogether. I want them to be exactly like I am, except for these chains, saying, I want you all to be Christians, but I don't want you to go through the persecution that I'm going through right now. And so here you have Paul say, yeah, I not only want you, Agrippa, to become as I am, but all of you that are in this room, Paul said, I want you to all be like me. Not because Paul was, or thinking that he was so much better than anyone else, or there was something about him that made him special and made him better, and that they needed to be like him, but they needed to be like Christ. See, Paul would write in one of his letters, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And that's what he was saying. I would love that you would all be like me. Not that I'm better than you, but that I'm striving to be like Christ. And that's what I want for you, except for these chains. I don't want you to go through this persecution and this punishment like I am. But if you could obey the gospel and follow Christ, if it meant chains, then so be it. And so here you have Paul say, I wish that you would be like I am. And so you ask this question, and this is something I want you to do. And when I ask you this question, I don't want you to think about anyone else. And I want you to take a minute and actually want you to reflect about this. This is something we're going to walk through with the few minutes that we talk about this. What if everyone in the church was just like me? That's what Paul said. Paul said, I wish that you were all like me. Not that Paul was perfect or anywhere close. He knew that. Paul would constantly talk about that. I'm the chiefest of sinners. I'm the least of the apostles. Paul understood that he was not even close to perfect, but that he was striving to be. And so he said, I wish that you were as I am. So I genuinely want you to ask that question to yourself. What if everyone in the church was just like me? You know, we talk about people responding and how you would respond to that. What if, I did. What if everyone on the Ultimate Frisbee team was just like I was? Would the team be better, worse, or the same? But that's just such a small thing that's insignificant and doesn't matter. Let's talk about this. This is real. What if everyone in the church was just like me? And I don't want you to ask yourself that in respect of what if the ones that I'm better than, and if they could be as good as I was, and I'm not good at that. No, I want you. This is not about other people. This is just about me. What if everyone in the church was just like me? Some people, that's scary. For some people, it's not. For people like Paul, didn't have everything right or even close, and he knew that. But he knew that he was striving for that, and he was willing to say, I wish that you were like me. But for a lot of us, I think the answer, and when you walk through hypothetically what the church would look like if everyone was like me, is not pretty. And so when you think about what the church would look like if everyone was like me, and how I responded to situations, how I reacted to situations, what I did in the world and what I did in the church building, what if everyone in the church was just like me? There's three options. The church is either going to look like it does now, it's going to look better than it does now, or it's going to look worse than it does now. That's going to fit into one of those three. So what does it look like? That's something that would take a lot longer than we have this morning to sit and meditate on. And I want you to do that. I want you to go home, and I genuinely want you to sit, and I want you to think about what would the church look like? would it be better? Would it be the same? Or would it be worse? And you know, for a lot of people, I know when I did it, it's a little scary. Because I know there are things that I need to work on, but then there are things that I should work on, but I don't really. And you know, one of the biggest changes, they actually did a study on this, on why you don't change bad habits that like affect other people. Like in the workforce, this is what they did. Why don't you become the person that does the job that needs to be done? Why don't you change? They interviewed people that were willing to be honest about the fact that they were lazy. And you got to admire the fact that they were willing to admit that. A lot of people wouldn't, that they did. And then they took them and they said, well, what is your reason for not? Why don't you become the change? Because a lot of these people want it to be done. It's not that they're just okay with it not. They want it to get done. And so the question was asked, well, give me your number one reason why you don't change. And the response, number one response by a landslide, was because there's someone else that will come and do it. And if someone else will, I don't have to. And that was the number one response. And you think about your own life, especially we talk about being in the church, things that I need to work on, things that I need to change, things that I need to do. And the number one response, and I'm willing to say this confidently, the number one reason why I don't is because someone else will. You know, at first when we talked about the workforce and these lazy people not doing what they need to do, and the number one reason they don't is because someone else is going to do it, and you're just like, yep, I know them. And I do. I can think of people, and that's not good on my part, but you do think of people that don't do what they need to do because they know I'm going to come and clean it up later. And you know, you kind of get this kind of disgust at not the person specifically, but that mindset that they'd be willing to leave something undone because they know someone else is going to do it. But then we talk about spiritually speaking, and then a lot of us have that mindset. And I'm talking to myself here. This is not something that I'm preaching at you, and I'm not talking to myself. This was something that I had to walk through for myself before I could ever talk to you about it. And so when we think about what would the church look like if it was just me, this isn't about really the church. This is about examining my own life. This is just a really good way to do it. Because a lot of times when we just examine what the church looks like, and the church is perfect, it's the people in the church that aren't. And so I get really frustrated when people say, you know, the church isn't perfect and there's so much wrong with the church. There's nothing wrong with the church. There's things wrong with the people in the church. We got to get that straight. And so when we think about this isn't about examining the body. This is really about examining yourself, but looking at it through a lens of what would be different if everyone was like me. Because ultimately what this is about bringing to light all of the things that I don't do, because ultimately someone else will. Because that's really what that boils down to. Most of the things that we lack, and I say we, me specifically, spiritually speaking, and helping the body to grow, I don't do those because I just don't want to. I don't do those because someone else is. Which is the exact mindset that drives me crazy at work or anywhere else, but I'm okay with doing it myself when it comes to spiritual matters. And so when we think about this, I'm just going to walk through some things because I don't know what it is maybe with you in your own spiritual life that you examine and you look at and you go, this, if everyone did this like I did it, we'd be in a mess. And there are things in my life, as spiritually speaking, that if everyone did it the way that I did it, we'd be in a mess. And so when we walk through some of these things, I'm not saying these because I know specific people that are struggling with them. I'm just walking through some. And walking through, because really what this is about examination of yourself, because that's something you're going to have to do at home. Okay, I'm not going to be able to walk over everything that we as a church need to work on. That would be impossible. But I do want to walk through some things. You know, Matthew 28, 19 through 20, or whether you go to Mark 16, 15 to 16, says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. We talked about this verse in Bible class. Go into the world and preach the gospel to every. He that believes and is baptized will be saved. He that does not believe will be condemned. And you know, we read that, the Great Commission, and you know, Christians need to evangelize. And that's the first one. What would evangelism look like if everyone in the church was just like me? Would it be the same? Would it be better? Or would it be worse? And for each one of these that we walk through, I just want you to answer the question. For most of these, it's going to be very easy to answer. These aren't going to be ones that's like, well, I actually don't know. Most of these are going to be like, yeah, yes, no, same. So what would evangelism look like if everyone in the church was just like me? We talk about the Great Commission and evangelism and going into all the world and preaching the gospel. And we see go, but it doesn't feel personal. You see, well, yeah, I need to evangelize, but I'm not good at that. I'm not good with people. The people are just not my thing. I'm not good with going. We see go and we see go preacher, we see go elder, we see go people that are good at talking, we see go teacher, but we don't see go me. That was go me. We just said, I need you to go into all the world and preach the gospel. This was a command. This wasn't something that he said would be a good idea. This wasn't something that he wanted us to do. This was something he said, I need you to do. I need you to go into all the world. Matthew, he said, go, therefore, make disciples. Because of all this, you said, therefore, once you stop, you see, because of all the stuff that I've already talked to you about, I need you to go. That's personal. He said, I need you to go. Not just the people that get up in the pulpit and preach. That's kind of expected of the preacher to do evangelism. It's kind of expected of the elders to do evangelism. It's kind of expected of the deacons to do evangelism. It's kind of expected of the Bible class teachers to have some role in evangelism. It's kind of expected of people in leadership roles to do evangelism. It's kind of expected of you. But it's expected of every single Christian to evangelize. But I also want you to understand that evangelism doesn't look like every single person in this room sitting down and doing a one-on-one Bible study. That would be great, but not everyone can do that. I understand that because I think a lot of times we talk about evangelism, we just push that you need to go do the Bible studies. And if everyone in this room got to the point where they could do one-on-one Bible studies, that would be amazing. But there are some people that genuinely, that is something they cannot do. You see, God gave us all different talents, and he doesn't expect us to do something that we cannot do. For some people, evangelism looks like being the house that they have the Bible study at, being the one that makes the dinner, being the one that invites them, being the one that says, hey, look, my coworker has been talking to me about Jesus. I have no clue how to do a Bible study. Will you come with me? I will be there. I will sit down with you, but I don't know how to do that. I think every one of us should work towards the point of being able to do a Bible study, but not everyone sitting here right now can do that, and that's okay. But there is still a role that you can play in evangelism, and God is expecting you to find out what that is and do it. Not everyone has the same role, and that is right. If we all could do the exact same things to the exact same ability, then we wouldn't be a body. We would just be a specific body part. We're a body because we have different roles and different abilities and different talents, and we have to use those talents in evangelism because it was a command, not an idea. He said, I need you to go. And so when we think about evangelism, what would evangelism look like if everyone in the church was just like me? Would it look the same? We kind of had this slump where we stopped evangelizing, and it's become quite obvious. We stopped door knocking because apparently door knocking doesn't work. We stopped doing one-on-one Bible studies because no one wants to hear about it. And so what we did is we would invite people to church. But I want you to understand that 90% of people are not going to come into this building because this is uncomfortable for someone that is not a Christian. And so when we invite them to the building, it's like inviting someone that you just met to come to your house. Has that ever happened to you? You know how awkward that feels? Like the first time you go over to someone's house. Well, double that because I just met you. It's really awkward. It's really uncomfortable. And that's that same gut feeling that you're asking them to have by just asking them to come to the church building. Some of them will do it. Some of them build up the courage to come, but a lot of them won't. And so we have to go. Jesus didn't say bring, he said go. And so we have to understand that evangelism is something that we have to work on in our talent. So what would that look like? Would evangelism be the same? Would it be better? Some of us are really good at evangelism, and that's amazing. Or would it be worse? Would everyone in the church have a response to evangelism that is, I'm no good at it, and there are people that are better, and they're going to be the ones that will do it, and then nothing gets done? And we walk through a lot of things, and you could, whether it be like benevolence, what would benevolence look like? What would, we talked about evangelism. What would it look like, talking about unity if everyone responded to conflict the same way. Because there's going to be conflict. People will create conflict. If everyone responded to conflict, every Christian responded to conflict in the same way, what would the church look like? Because we're going to get in arguments. What if every time two Christians got into an argument and they responded like I did, would there be more unity, the same amount of unity, or less unity? And there's a lot of these things that we walk through. What would it look like if everyone responded the way that I did? And you think about this one. Would Jesus truly be number one? That's an interesting thought, because it's something I think we as Christians don't fully walk through in our mind. What is number one in our life? Because we just put God number one, yeah, done. But then we look at our life and we examine what we really spend most of our time on, what we most look forward to, what we most do, and our number one becomes a lot more blurred. I think for some Christians, number one has like a 2 or 3 way tie. And so when you think about what if everyone in the church was just like me when it came to what do I really put first, let us change. What do I genuinely put first? Your instant response is and should be God. But what do you actually put first? What do you seek after first? There are some, and I hear this from the older preachers, they wake up and first thing they do in the morning is pray, and they study the Bible. And schedules change that. I'm not saying that's what you have to do. I'm going to be honest, first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I lay in bed for like 5 minutes trying to exist, and then I check my phone. And you think about, that's something you do, but what are you chasing after in your life? What is your actual number one thing that you're going after? Is it genuinely God? What are you putting the most time towards? I might study the Bible for like 30 minutes and then watch movies for like 4 hours in a day. That's what I've done a lot this summer, is watched a whole lot of movies. Lots of Netflix, because I had nothing else to do. And I started thinking about it. How much time am I spending with entertainment in comparison to how much time am I genuinely spending studying God's Word? And I'm not saying that you have to perfectly match the amount of time you spend entertaining yourself with the amount of time that you spend studying the Word of God. But I want you to think about, what are you genuinely chasing after? Because you're chasing after something. And that's a question you have to answer. And then you ask yourself the next question: what if everyone in the church was chasing the same thing I was? What would the church look like? If everyone was chasing the same thing I was, would there even be a church? Some of these answers are going to scare you. They should. Because there's something in your life that isn't right. You're a human. There are multiple things in my life that aren't right. And so when you ask myself, I see those things, and then I try to think about what the church would look like if we all responded like that, and you get something much worse than where we're at right now and nowhere near better. And the point of this lesson isn't to make you feel bad or to make you feel less about yourself or to make you feel uncomfortable. The point of this lesson is, as we as the church, if we're going to grow, and there was a time when the church turned the world upside down. And I feel like to an extent, the world is turning the church upside down. And if we're going to change that, then first we have to change ourselves, because we're starting to look like the world instead of looking like the light. And if we're going to change the world, first we have to change ourselves, get ourselves back to where we need to be. And so the point of this is examination. When Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, he said, examine yourselves. That wasn't just when we take the Lord's Supper, think about his body. That's something you need to do. He said, but I want you to examine yourself. When I examine myself, what I'm doing is I'm looking down in my life and I'm thinking about what Jesus did, the opportunities that he gave me, and how do I respond to that. Examine yourself. And so that's what the point of this was this morning. And as we close, again, I want to preface with, this was not a target at anyone. This wasn't an attempt to step on anyone's toes or make people angry. What this was is, I want you to think about this. Because the church, if we're going to be unified, if we're going to grow, if we're going to turn back into the first century church, and I'm not saying we aren't now, but if we're going to get more like them, then we have to examine ourselves and see what's different. Why don't we look the same as they do. Examine yourselves. That's what Jesus asked of us. I need you to examine yourself. And so as we examine yourselves, ask yourself the question, what if everyone in the church looked just like me? Would it be better? Would it be worse? Or would it be the same? You know, you're not going to get the same for most of your answers. So really what it comes down to is, if everyone in the church was just like me, would it be better or would it be worse? And that's a question I want you to answer for yourself. And I want you to think about that. And I don't want you to just think about it now and then forget about the question at lunch. I want you to keep thinking about that. And then once you figure out what it is that would not make it better, let's start working on that. And so maybe someone's here this morning and you're looking at this, and maybe it's not something that we went over, but it's something you've thought about, or maybe it was something that we went over, that when you examine yourself and you look at your life and you look at how you respond and how you react, if everyone in the church was just like me, we would be worse. And you want prayers of forgiveness, prayers to help you get through that, but more than that, you want prayers of encouragement and prayers of courage to take whatever that is and to have the strength to change it, because change is hard. And you need prayers, because the prayers of a righteous man avails much. You want the prayers of your brethren to help you start the process of fixing whatever that is. We'd love to pray with you as we stand and as we sing.